Welcome to the webinar hosted by USABO and USABO alumni. It's very exciting to see this many people tune into the event, and we hope you're looking forward to the great experience today just as much as we are. Today, we will be hearing from multiple USABO finalists, and they will be giving their take on how to prepare for the prestigious open exam set to take place in February of 2023. My name is Leanne, and I will be hosting today's webinar. Before we get started, whether or not you will be taking the open exam this year or you're planning on taking it in the coming years, this webinar will be helpful to everyone, and we would like to welcome you to our event today. We are so honored to have Mrs. Kathy Frame, the advisor and consultant of USABO, to guide us today. And we're also very happy to have our guest speakers. We have Grayson, Kevin, and Derek. We're all USABO finalists. And we're very excited to share our knowledge and experiences, so let's get started. As a quick overview, today we will be starting off with reviewing important registration information for the competition, and then we will cover each exam topic briefly with recommended resources. And the speakers will then present their own suggested study strategies on how to best prepare for the difficult questions, as well as test-taking strategies that you can use during the exam. And then we will be ending with a Q&A session. So throughout the webinar, feel free to send in questions and we will try to answer them according to how much time we have available at the end. But please be sure to put your questions in the Q&A and not the chat, because then the alumni will be able to respond to your questions directly. So let's get started with an overview of the USABO competition and some registration reminders as presented by Ms. Frame. Mrs. Frame is a lifetime educator who has worked with the USABO when it was run by students at Harvard in the 90s. And the Center for Excellence in Education started its sponsorship in 2002, and she continued to contribute to the program. So from 2009 until 2018, she served as director and now serves as USABO consultant and advisor. Let's welcome Mrs. Frame.
Thank you, Leanne. That's great. That's great. Title is, what is the USABO? As a teacher, I'd love to say to each one of you, what do you think the USABO is? Okay, it's the USA Biology Olympiad. But what does it mean to you? What I have found through the years, it's a group of the most passionate biology students that I've ever had the opportunity to work with, right? You all seem to just totally encompass it and enjoy it. It's always been a pleasure for me. It's taking your curiosity and raising it to levels that you had not even expected. And as you go through these exams, even on the open exam, you're going to start to meet each other. And one of the ideas is you're going to meet each other through these webinars as well, and encourage each other in taking the test itself. We hope that it will serve that function for you. And one thing I'm going to point out is that there is a USABO clubs section in the student corner. You don't have to have paid your registration for that particular section. But if you click on that, you'll see all the clubs that are in your particular state or another state. And the emails are hot, so you can actually connect with them. So we're about connecting each other, all these people that have the same passion itself. The competition itself is 4 tiers. We have the open exam, which will be in February 2nd. And usually we have about 5,000 to 8,500 students. Right now, our registration's a little low. The semi is 600, that'll be in March. And then the national final exams will be for 20 students. It's going to be held at Marymount University in Arlington, Virginia. The dates have now changed from what's on our calendar. They'll be from June 1 through June 14th. That'll be followed by the international exam, which will be an in-person exam this year in the United Arab Emirates, UAE, in Dubai. And that starts on July 2nd and goes through July 12th. So lots to look forward for. Those are some of your goals for it. And the next, I was going to talk a little bit about the registration process. I've actually done a real little bit of readjustment on the sites. I find that teachers are having a hard time registering. So I really hopefully made it much more clear on the site itself. But it's 3 columns. And the first column is if it's a new school, principals or teachers can register that school. If it's a returning school, it's the second column. And what's beauty about that is they've registered before. So when they click on their school in the drop-down menu, they're able to collect all that data about what the address is, who the principal is, the finance officer, all of that. They don't have to fill out an extensive form. And for students, the third column is for those whose schools are registering. Just shouldn't put your name in there and say, oh, I'm going to be able to take the USABO exam. There's another little block at the bottom of the USABO registration page called Need a School. And if you click on that, you can give me your information. Then I do my best to identify a school that can host you for that. So make sure you register, tell all of your friends to register as well, and let's get those numbers up. And then if you know other schools that haven't registered, encourage them to register as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Frame. That was a great introduction to this webinar. So at this time, we will be getting started with the content of the webinar, and I would like to start by welcoming our speakers. We will be hearing from Grayson Wren. Grayson is a freshman at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He competed at the USABO National Finals in 2021 and 2022 and represented Team USA at the 2021 International Biology Olympiad, where he earned a silver medal. And he is now studying bioengineering. We will also get the chance to hear great advice from Kevin Bao, a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In high school, he attended the USABO finals in 2013, 2014, and 2015. And he is now studying evolutionary genetics. And you may have heard him talk a bit about the Nobel Prize earlier in the webinar. And our final speaker, Derek Chen, is a freshman at MIT studying computer science or bioengineering. He was not only a winner as a USABO finalist in 2021 and 2022, he was also a silver medalist at the 2021 IBO. So all of our speakers have very extensive experience. We will first be going over each of our exam topics that show up on the USABO with Grayson and Kevin. So let's give a warm welcome to our speakers.
So so Kevin and I will be covering first some of the USABO topics and like recommended resources for the different sections of the exam.
Yeah, so I think I thought it would be a nice touch to open with a quote. For those of you who've read the textbook, already one of the favorite textbooks and favorite sort of starting places for anyone interested in the USABO is Campbell's Biology. Normally I actually have it next to me, but I actually have a different book right now. But this is a quote from one of the interviews featured in that book, Dr. Francisco Mojica, that says studying biology, basically saying wow all the time. And I think it's really a pleasure and an honor to study this subject because it's so interesting. So I think this is a good place to start.
So something that we'll be going over as we go through this section is a lot of these like books that are like pretty good resources for how you can focus on a specific topic that's covered in the USABO exam. A lot of these resources that we're given aren't necessarily the most applicable to the open exam. And a lot of these books that we're going to be recommending are going to give you like a knowledge and skills that will go beyond the scope of what's usually going to be asked in the open exam. So for that sake, for the sake of like sharing information and resources, we're just going to provide like general guidelines to follow if you want to deepen your exploration of some of these topics. But in terms of like the USABO openings exam especially, Campbell's Biology is always going to be the best starting point of where you want to like work up your knowledge base. So I guess now we'll move on and just talk about some of the specific topics that are going to be covered.
Well, yeah, the first topic on the biggest one I think people think of when they think about biology is molecular biology, which focuses on molecular and cellular biology. It's basically the field that focuses on cells and what happens inside of them. We can think of cells as these really complex chemical machines, right? Questions in this category tend to focus on analysis methods. Here's an example of a I actually think this is a Western blot, which takes proteins, runs them through a gel, separating them by size, and then on the side there is an image of yeast. I got to make the PowerPoint in part, so I put a picture of always my work with. So understanding how cell processes work and being able to answer questions to that effect, I think you will find to be the I think you find this category to be very focused on methods and on discoveries related to what those methods have found. So pretty straightforward.
So next we have genetics. Genetics is like the section of the exam that's going to be most like computationally focused. So oftentimes for students who have experience with math or like quantitative thinking, the section might come a little easier than some of the other ones. Generally speaking, genetics focuses primarily on inheritance and like how the inheritance of specific traits in different inheritance patterns will be passed down. In terms of preparing for genetics, Campbell's biology is the good start, but as we said, we're going to be recommending some additional resources that you can use if you want to further your understanding or further your knowledge of a specific topic. In terms of genetics, a lot of the popular books that are used with a focus on genetics, Brooker's has a nice molecular genetics book. It's a little more focused on like the molecular side, so it's not as applicable. Kevin can talk more about Griffiths as well.
No, I love Griffiths. Griffiths Genetics Introduction to Genetic Analysis is a little bit more focused on the I guess I would say problem-solving side of things. It's focused on genetics analysis. But I think what's important to emphasize to everyone, and I do see a question in the chat, is will there be questions that cannot be answered with just Campbell's knowledge, or what is Campbell's not enough for? The answer is it depends, and but I would highly recommend that all students that they really focus on getting a good grasp of that textbook first. I've had the pleasure of not only being able to compete, but also in my time having able to teach students who compete in USABO. And my advice is always, really focus on knowing the basics before trying to move on to more advanced material. Right? Don't try to build a house on shaky foundations.
Yeah, and this is especially true for the earlier one with cell biology, because cell biology, especially compared to some of the other topics, really builds on the basics to like get to the higher level things. The next topic is going to be plant anatomy, plant physiology. This is going to focus on like the physiology and the anatomy of plants. So like, what does the structure of a plant look like? How do you distinguish the different parts of the plant based off of how they look on a microscope? What are the different functions? How do these functions happen? Once again, Campbell's biology, very good starting point for plants. But if you're interested, if plants, sorry, if plants is a subject that's particularly interesting to you, then some additional resources, additional books that you can consider moving on to, Raven Biology of Plants, and then for a more math-based one, you can like look at Thais Plants Physiology.
I would not recommend Thais's works on plants unless you're really into them. Yeah, they're very good books, but Lincoln Thais is it's a very advanced treatment of the subject. He has two actually different books, Plant Physiology and Fundamentals of Plant Physiology. I don't recommend either of them, but the Fundamentals is the easier book of the two. So if you're looking for more introductory text, that would be one. Raven's Plants is a great resource, but again, Campbell is probably the best resource for this. Neil Campbell himself, the original author of the book series, was a botanist, so they have a very, very good treatment of plants in that particular book.
I think just doubling down on this point that I think Kevin and I both are trying to make is that when we say that these are additional books that you can use, this is primarily if this is something that you find really interesting or this is something that you really want to explore more about, versus this is what you need to do in order to succeed on the OPENS exam. Because a lot of the OPENS exam questions will be designed based off of Campbell's biology. And so this extra knowledge and extra information, the extra skills that you can develop by reading these additional books may not be the most useful in terms of solving problems on the open exam, but they're very interesting books, and they give you very interesting perspectives on some topics if you want to delve deeper into them. Anatomy and physiology. So this is the biggest topic on the USABO exam. It's the greatest percentage of points. I think it's 25% of the test is animals, anatomy and physiology. And a lot of the times on the exam, you'll see that this focuses primarily on like human anatomy and physiology, but the topic itself is called like animals. And so I think it's important to keep in mind that when you go through and you try to learn about the different functions of the different organ systems and etc., even though it's most like relevant, I guess, for humans to learn about like how humans work, that's like the scope of the section is not limited solely to how humans function. So I think Campbell's does explore some differential anatomy and physiology between different animal groups, and that's definitely something that I would consider looking at.
Yeah, and then lastly, the two smallest subjects are ecology, right, which talks about interaction of organisms in the environment, and biosystematics, which is the study of how organisms are classified. You'll find that these two categories are not super substantial on the actual exam, but they're still really good to know. I personally find biosystematics really interesting, but many people, I guess, consider it a little dull. These are two sections that if you read Campbell's thoroughly, you should be more than covered for those particular categories. It's important to know, it's important to know all the basic information. And then for biosystematics, it can get very deep. So it depends on how much you want to know. If you find it interesting, a ton of resources available. But two areas that I would highly recommend, getting a really good grasp of what the subject basically says to you. And then if you're interested, looking for more.
All right, and a lot of what we've been talking about so far are like textbook recommendations, and textbooks aren't always the easiest to like come across. Some of them are actually quite expensive. And so we wanted to offer a lot of free resources, examples that could also be really helpful if you're preparing for the opens exam. So we have like a list here. Personal recommendations. I think that Ninja Nerd Lectures does a very good approach at a lot of some of the more complicated elements of like cell biology, biochemistry, and anatomy and physiology. His videos are quite long usually, but I think it's a very detailed and well explained explanation of like what's really happening.
Thank you so much, Grayson and Kevin. That was very, very helpful advice, and I'm sure we all learned a lot from it. If you have any questions about the topics of the exam or what they just said, feel free to enter them in the Q&A box and we can answer them later, or you may check the answered questions now to see whether a question you have has been answered already, then you don't have to ask it again. But now that we've heard about what the alumni recommend for you to check out for each exam topic, we will now move on to some study strategies, which I saw some people had questions about. So we will now hear from Derek and Kevin on study strategies that they found to be helpful. Let's welcome the speakers again.
Okay, yeah, so just as Kevin and Grayson mentioned in the previous section, there are like lots of additional textbooks for like studying, so like Raven's Biology of Plants, if you want to like learn more about plants biology in specific. And like Albert's is like molecular biology of the cell, and it goes really into detail about like lots of all the different organelles and all the different trafficking pathways and the cell, and just like in general, very in detail. But Campbell's is the best textbook for giving an overall view of like all of biology, and it is very comprehensive. So before you start any additional textbook, you should make sure you have Campbell like solidly down. And also, test writers tend to pull from Campbell's more than like any other textbook. So therefore, it's also like what you should expect on the exam. So any piece of information or diagram from Campbell is generally fair game. And yeah, you should just like have it down solidly before you start on other textbooks generally.
Yeah, I have read, and Kathy remembers this from when I competed. I love textbooks and I read a bunch of them. And honestly, at the end of the day, most knowledge you can figure out from Campbell's based knowledge. But if I had not read Campbell as well as I had, there would have been no way for me to understand any of the other textbooks. So I would really focus on it. If your sort of goal is just I'm gonna do really well on the exams. There isn't super duper like, oh, this textbook is the secret key to USABO. You know, you should read what interests you, and I think that will help you the most. Man, there are a lot of questions. I shouldn't try to answer while I'm speaking. Yeah.
Uh,
Oh.
oh yeah, you can start for this one.
Oh, sure. I really, I as someone who's been involved in the USABO for a long time, think that, one really great thing about the USABO exams is that they have a very highly human quality to them. Yeah, you can think about what the writer is. There's always a person behind the writer. It's not like some exams which have like huge committees of 100 people, working on every question. These questions are written by people who are former competitors, academics, educators. And oftentimes when we write a question, there is an intent behind it, right? So try to think about what sorts of things the question writer might be trying to ask, and use that as a way of trying to figure out what the answer is going to be. Joseph, sorry, Derek, do you want to speak a little bit more?
Yeah, so like once you do enough questions, you'll generally get a sense of like what certain, because like in USABO, because it's like generally based on Campbell's on it's a lot of questions generally like tend to follow the same format. For example, Hamilton's rule is something that comes up a lot, or like especially calculation questions. So like things like Hamilton's rule, and then they often have like linked genes crossing tables, and you have to find the map distance. Things like these come up a lot. And yeah, all of Mendelian genetics. So you should be familiar with them. And once you see one of these questions, it's sort of like how it should be done. So if you do enough questions, you'll be able to sort of like predict like what the question wants and then how to do the question. And then also, again, besides just like a lot of calculation topics appearing multiple times, a lot of different memorization topics also do appear a lot. One of these are amino acids. So like almost on every test, there is a question about a protein and they give you the amino acid sequence, and you want to be able to like predict certain properties of the protein, like whether it's hydrophilic or hydrophobic or things like that. And so having the amino acids memorized basically gives you a free point on that test. So like the properties of the amino acid, etc. And then other common topics include things like hormones, so both plant and animal hormones. And then, yeah, so once you do enough tests, you'll sort of have a sense for what appears often. And then besides just like being able to like have like facts memorized, you should also be able to like practice drawing out diagrams to sort of like, because often I think visual memory is something that's like really good to practice for the USABO test, because like diagrams are just do a better job of expressing certain information, like for example, all the different life cycles of like alternation of generations and stuff like that. And so, yeah, you should try drawing out the diagrams from Campbell's and memories. And also, yes, those diagrams, as well as the information that is in those like side boxes, can still appear on the exam. It's not just the information in like the main text.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, my good friend Joseph, who's also a USABO finalist tonight, like to play this game where we will describe very specific text or very specific like parts of a diagram in Campbell's, and we'll challenge the other person to see who can find the diagram faster. So that's a game I like to play. It's just really an example of those of us who really like the book, what we sort of how engaged we are with it. So just as an example.
Oh yeah, and then final thing about memorization before we move on to the next section. You should memorize the amino acids, but you should not memorize the codon table, because generally if they require something that requires the codon table, they will give it to you on the exam. So that is something you do not generally need to memorize.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Derek and Kevin, for the great recommendations. We don't get to hear from such experienced alumni every day. So if you have any questions, again, you can enter them in, and be sure to check if a question you have has been answered already. But last but not least, we will be hearing about test-taking strategies that you can consider when you're approaching questions during the actual exam, because the exam questions are maybe structured differently than what you are used to at school on school tests. So let's welcome Derek and Grayson once again.
Okay, so let's first start with some like just like basics things to just like do before the exam and make sure you have all set. So first thing is like take care of your body leading up to the exam. You should definitely sleep, like get a good night's sleep before the exam, like the day before, but you should also try to not like pull any all-nighters or sleep especially late. like the few days leading up to the exam, because like that can still negatively impact your performance. And then also make sure that you like get a good meal in before the exam. And then again, you should also sort of know the logistics of your exam. So like when you have to show up, what room number you are, who the proctor is, when you have to arrive, all of these to like know this before the exam. So like you're not on the day of the exam, like you can't find the room number or something. And then finally, for like the sort of grading / scoring side, you should fill out every single question on the opens. It is multiple choice. There is no penalty for guessing. You should just fill out every single question. Guessing is better than leaving it blank. And then also, if you see questions that you don't know, just keep calm and remember that you only need like around 50%. And sometimes it's even lower than that. It's like 40% to like pass the exam. So you don't have to get every single question correct.
Yeah, and then during the test, one of the most important things is managing your time. This becomes more and more important like the further into the test you go, but keep in mind that you don't have to do the test in order. So you can start with the sections that you're most confident with. So just in general, the test is split into sections based off the topics in the USABO Student Resource Center. So oftentimes when you open the test, you're going to see that cell biology is going to be the first section. Now, if cell biology is a topic that you're not as comfortable with as, say, plant biology, then you can skip through cell biology and move straight onto the plant section after that. And I think this is really important because I'm still recovering from some crazy illness. But this is important when you're managing your time because sometimes during the test, you're going to be in kind of a rush and you're going to run out of time. So you have to know which questions are the ones that you're most likely to be able to do in a specific amount of time. And those come with the section that you're strongest with. This strategy especially applies when you're if you make are taking the semifinals exam, which has parts of like different formats. And it's really important to prioritize which sections you want to do because, or like which sections are most worth your time to do. And that kind of goes with the second point, which is that if the question has like more than 6 lines of text or it has like a bunch of graphs you have to interpret, it's probably not worth your time because that question is worth just as much as the next question, which might just be like a sentence asking something and then a couple answer choices. And so when you're going through the exam on your first pass through, you want to make sure that you're getting all of the questions that you can do in a reasonable amount of time. And you do prioritizing the questions that are most like worth it in terms of how much time you're using. And then after you go through it the first time around, that's when you should go back and start working through some of the ones that you skipped and start double checking some of your work on the other questions.
Yeah, so yeah, this is also like, yeah, if you've like studied ethology so far, it's like optimal foraging model. So you should like try to maximize your points per like time spent. But yeah, in the same vein, like if like not only if like the text is like really long for the question, if you're spending like super long on the calculations for a question, like you're doing like some like crazy math, you should also just like take a deep breath, skip that question for now, and then move on to the next question. And yeah, don't fall for the sunk cost fallacy where like you should like continue spending more time on the question. If you're close, you should like obviously try to finish it out. But if you're not close, you should just move on and then just return to it later. And yes, so sometimes you won't always know the question. So you should also, there's also like guessing strategies to sort of like maximize your chance that you get it correct, even if you aren't 100% sure of the answer. So one of the main tips is to use process of elimination before guessing. So if you can like narrow it down from like 5 options to 3 options, that like increases your chance by like from like 20% to like 33%, which is like a massive increase in chance. And yeah, getting it down to 2 options is even better. So yeah, just like look to see what seems unreasonable and then cross it out. And then also when possible, if like the answer has like multiple different like things in it, or it's like each multiple choice answer like it's like multiple fill in the blanks things, you should pick the choice that has the most attributes with the other choice. And because this is what the test writer generally like expects people to get tripped up on. So you should pick the choice that is most in common with the other choices. And then finally, once you do enough questions, you'll probably get a sense of what seems correct. So for example, if you've done Bayes rules before, you know that generally like, even if it's like genetics with Bayes rules, which should generally normal genetics questions will have like a power of 2 in the denominator or something. If you do Bayes rules, the denominator will be odd. So this is like something you can also use to eliminate choices when you're guessing. So yeah, just like do more problems and you'll like get a sense of which ones the test writer is like putting the answer out to like throw you off and which ones are actually correct.
And so one of the most important things is checking your work, because a lot of the times these questions might have a word or something that would completely change what the question is asking. So this first bit is about that. Watch out for the words like not or except or like possible answers. These words kind of change your thinking, and they really make sure you're reading it twice if you're prone to missing that kind of information, because these are the words that you have to catch. I will say that generally on USABO exams, I believe that a lot of these words like not, accept, like do not, they're generally written in all capital letters, and so they stand out a little more than otherwise, but it's still very easy to miss this when you're rushing through the test. So definitely pay attention to that. Also, make sure you check your work as you go through to maximize accuracy. One strategy I use to do this effectively is that I will separate my scratch paper into sections, and each section has the work for one problem. So that when I'm checking through it, I know that if I want to check the work of question 33, I know that all my work for question 33 is within this section of this piece of paper. And that makes it easy to go back and see how I did a specific problem, or like the specific parts of a problem. And then near the end of the test, make sure you go through and see that all the answers are bubbled in correctly. Something that I would recommend is when you're working through the problems on a piece of paper, write down the answer that you want for each question. And then as you go back through, make sure that 1, all the questions are filled out, and 2, that the answers that you've selected on the online version match what you have written down on your paper. Because it's easier to click a wrong button online than to physically write a letter down on your paper.
Yeah, and also you should also sometimes I feel like the online platform can be buggy, so you should also definitely double check to see everything is filled in and is filled in the way you want it to be filled in.
Okay, thank you so much to all of the speakers. So at this time, I would like to bring up some questions that I saw were pretty common. One, I think I wanted to bring up to the speakers, and please continue to put in questions, is I know throughout this webinar, the speakers kind of mentioned some general advice. So I wanted to ask if each one of you could go through your own study methods, such as did you use flashcards, or did you take practice tests, and just kind of your own personal journey in studying for this exam. Anyone could start.
Yeah, I can start. So I think that in my experience, I don't really work well with structured out studying times. So I never used a schedule where I would block off 3 hours a day and say, this is the time I'm going to use to study for USABO. The way I approached it was more along the lines of, if I was really interested in a topic, I would naturally want to just learn more about it. And so I kind of had very streaky study times where sometimes I would maybe not look at biology for 2 weeks, and then sometimes I would spend 10 hours a day for 3 days in a row just reading about a specific topic that really interested me. And I found that doing it this way, I never forced myself to study when I really wasn't feeling up to it. And I think this helped me avoid burning out while I was preparing for the USABO exams.
Same thing for me. I think it's just you should study when you're in the mood to study, and you shouldn't force yourself to study if you aren't feeling like it, because if you do that, you will probably just be less efficient. And if you don't want to study that day and you try to force yourself to study, then your brain just won't absorb any of the information that is coming at you. Personally, for ways I'd study, I would use flashcards, and I think flashcards are a good way, especially you can do them anywhere. For example, at lunch, you can just look through them really quickly, just make sure you know what's going on. And also, I think an important part that I did have on the slides is also, you should try to draw the diagrams, because visual memory, or I think for me at least, visual memory is something that works better than just memorizing words.
I feel like we're all very different strategies. When I studied, never used a single resource besides textbooks. I hate other resources. I like just being able to sit for like 2 hours a day and read. And unlike Grayson, I read almost every day and I set aside time every day to read, but that's because I would often choose to study for USABO to the detriment of my other life things. But for me, it really helped to actually set time because I'm actually a really like disorganized person most of the time, as people who know me can tell you. I would say that for anyone who is curious, I have a lot of experience of like teaching other students and also like helping other people study. Everyone has a different way. Everyone don't think, oh well, this person did it this way. No, I read Campbell biology 10 times in high school. I read it 8 times. I read like 6 or sometimes before I made finals for the first time. That's not what you should do if you don't think that's effective for you. My really good friend Joseph, I mentioned earlier, he read Campbell a total of twice. He took really extensive notes each time. He does a lot of flashcards. He does a lot of study tools. He likes watching YouTube videos. I get distracted watching YouTube videos. It really depends, and I want everyone to really sort of know that like what works best for you, and I promise you know what works for you better than any of us do. So that's what I'm gonna say to you guys.
Yeah, you should definitely like try out multiple study strategies. You shouldn't like listen to us and be like, oh, they did it that way, so I have to do it that way. You should try what our advice is, and if it doesn't work for you, you should try like other study strategies and see which one works for you.
All right, thank you. I think another question that I often see students have is, what is your recommendation when you are reviewing questions that you get wrong on practice exams, especially if the information isn't something that you can directly point out in the Campbell's textbook? Then how are you able to learn from that and study from that to further your knowledge?
I think a lot of this depends on the kind of question that you're getting wrong. So if the question you're making a mistake on is something like more application based, such as like a genetics calculation, then I think you should go back through your work and see like where specifically you made a mistake and like why that happened, if it's just a spelling mistake or like if it's something that you interpreted wrong about the question or whatever. And then in terms of like the more knowledge-based questions where it's like asking about a certain like topic and it's something that you maybe aren't too familiar with, I think the way that I generally approached it was like, even if I didn't know this specific piece of information, how much like should I have been able to figure that out from being able to eliminate everything else? And I think a lot of the times when you're taking these tests, it's not about what you do know. It can be about like what you know the answer isn't. And even when the question seems to be really like covering like really specific topics, based off of what you've learned about in terms of like other things in biology, you should be able to eliminate a couple of the answer choices and work down to where you can make a decently educated guess.
And if I could just make a suggestion, one of the best ways, you're all asking, where are all these practice questions you're going to have? One of the best ways you can test yourself is to develop a really good question. Because in developing that question, you have to do the research on what the topic is, what the responses are. And from my own experience, it takes about at least 3 to 4 hours to develop a really strong question. Silence.
Yeah, and if you always have any question or like don't understand, like if you like look at the answer key and you like don't understand what's going on and the answer key doesn't have an explanation, this is why you should join the Biology Olympiad Discord server, because then you can always like ask like other people like for help on like understanding the question. And yeah, there'll always be like people who are willing to help you there. So that's a really good resource in my opinion.
And all the questions that are developed for the USABO, almost all, have a rationale for what the reasoning was behind that from all the question writers.
Well, this might be a question maybe more for Ms. Frame, but how would you recommend utilize, I know there's a lot of resources on the USABO website, including websites recommended from past alumni. So how would you recommend utilizing those resources to the fullest and how to use them effectively?
I would say go through them, just do a survey of them and then see which ones fit your study style, right? And what ones fill the gaps in some of the knowledge that you have, right? Like there are some that have the digital cards, or others that just have games that you play. Others are doing the 3D modeling. Some have practice genetics questions on them. So whichever one fits your style. And no, you're not going to know everything, but you'll know a lot.
Okay, I think I see a lot of people asking this question is something about how did you balance USABO and other extracurriculars and schoolwork? So
Good question.
that's a very big question if each speaker has something to say about that.
In my opinion, I think schoolwork should always come first. I think like schoolwork always comes before extracurriculars. But between like balancing like different extracurriculars, like for example, I know a lot of people here probably do like math competitions and stuff. You should try to first of all do what you like to do, not what you think is like the most advantageous for like college. You should, because like generally if you enjoy something, then you'll like be willing to spend more time in it, and which will like make you better at it. Because if you don't really enjoy something, then you'll like sort of be demotivated, and that can affect your performance. And then also there's a lot of different extracurriculars that like besides USABO, which can help you with USABO. For example, I learned a lot of like especially like my evolution knowledge and like anatomy knowledge through doing Science Olympiad, which I highly recommend. So these like extracurriculars, they don't have to be like mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and fully agree with Derek about like how my extracurriculars often like contributed towards learning more about USABO. I will say that the way that I approached studying made it easier to balance, because it wasn't that I had to set aside time from like a schedule every single day to focus on biology, but more along the lines of like today is a day where I don't really have too much other stuff. I have this time, and I'm really interested in like learning more about like some random biology topic, and then I just like go and spend my time studying that day, and I wouldn't really be worried about the other stuff, because if I had other things to prioritize, then I would be prioritizing those already, and I wouldn't be studying that day.
Yeah, sorry, I've been trying to type answers in the question, but they have a lot of great questions. I think I just forgot the question. Question again. Wait, was it about balancing extracurriculars, right? Sorry, my brain's a little bit of a mess. I think it's been a long time since I've had extracurriculars because I'm old. But I really think that I agree with what they said. And for me, like I love biology a lot, and almost all the activities I did were biology related. So they also fed into each other. I think don't let anything you do in your life become like a chore. I guess maybe if you like really hate English homework, then it's a chore. But in general, try to find ways to enjoy anything that you're doing, and then it won't be so bad. I genuinely liked all the things I did, even the terrible calculus homework I had every night that took 3 to 4 hours. But whatever, it's how life goes. I did actually enjoy that; it was terrible. But have fun with it. Have fun with USABO. It's such a great opportunity, and I really like it. I don't know, maybe I'm cheesy, but that's what I really think. And if you enjoy it, I think you will find yourself able to make the time for it.
Okay, a lot of people are also asking about this, and this may not be a large portion of the exam, but what do you have recommendations for the math-based questions or lab-based questions and how to prepare for them?
I think those types of questions especially are more based off of like how much experience you have working with those topics. Like the more you look at a Western blot, or the more you solve a question about a conditional probability with inheritance, the more developed your skills are going to be in the future if you see a similar problem come up. So unlike some of the other things where if you either know the hormone or you don't for like a specific function, with those a lot of it comes down to how much have you practiced with that specific, with like analyzing or knowing the concepts behind that specific lab technique or the specific problem solving technique that you're using to solve that problem.
Yeah, practice works really great. Everyone should practice.
Oh, yeah, sorry, what was the question again? I was trying to answer Q&A questions. It's too
Uh,
hard to read and type at the same time.
What do you recommend for math-based questions, and how far does the math go? Or how do you prepare for lab-based questions? Just some things that you might not see in a textbook.
The math should not go beyond like algebra. Like if you're, I mean, okay, there's statistics like chi-square, I guess, but like you shouldn't be doing calculus, obviously. But or like even like conics or something. But for the math-based questions, yeah, I think you just need to like do more of them, and also like it's a lot of probability, so you should just maybe like reading, like especially because like most of the math comes out in the genetics section, so you should like if you want to get more familiar with probability, taking like studying some like basic like competition math and probability might also be helpful. And then what was the other part of the question?
Some lab-based questions. Like
Yeah, lab-based questions are harder to sort of answer, but you should like study like the different lab techniques and like the main idea is like you want to know what the whole goal of doing a certain lab technique is, and like how like that lab technique accomplishes that goal. Like for example, how does gel electrophoresis actually separate the fragments, and then why you would want to do that. And once you understand the motive, like put yourself in the mind of the scientist who is like doing these like techniques, and once you understand the motive behind them, I think the questions become a lot better.
I think a lot of people are interested because it's a USABO for a lot of the successful finalists is like a multi-year process. So a lot of people are interested when you started preparing for it, and just in the long-term studying kind of path that you went through with the competition.
Yeah, this definitely also varies person by person, because I know there have been like a couple people in the last couple of years that have been finalists as freshmen in high school. Personally for me, I could like kind of started studying freshman year, and freshman year I wasn't working too hard on USABO. I was kind of like getting into high school. I did a bunch of clubs trying to find what I was most interested in, and then starting like sophomore and junior year was when I really started studying for this, and I made finals the first time junior year.
I started really studying in junior year, but I also had like experience in like mostly like I knew a lot of like previous like bio knowledge from like science Olympiad. So yeah, I think like if you do things like science Olympiad or science bowl, these are also other good ways to sort of develop your biology background and understanding that aren't just like studying for the USABO directly. So yeah, you can also like sort of have overlap there. But I think everyone's path is different, and you should not like compare yourself to other people.
Yeah, everyone's path is really different. Like I have been around the block, I would say, when it comes. Not Kathy has obviously more experience than me, but I know a lot of people. I've been involved in the community a long time. I started freshman year. It was a really funny story. I started studying with USABO not because I thought I loved biology, but because my mom had to bring my brother to take math classes for like AMC, and I was really, really bad at that. So, and there was an ad for USABO, but I registered and I studied and I took the class, and you know what? I did pretty well, and I liked the subject, and that's what happened. So I started freshman year. I made camp for the first time sophomore year. Honestly, didn't believe it. I saw it. I was like, what the heck? I did not think I would make camp. Or top 20, sorry, I should be more clear. I think it really varies. I know a lot of the freshman finalists personally, helped them along the way, and some of them read 6 hours, 8 hours a day. Some of them they read a lot, not quite 6 to 8 hours a day. It really varies from person to person. I think I think the more you love the subject, the easier it is for that number to not seem daunting. And the number seems really daunting to you, you shouldn't be that worried. Like it's once you start doing it, it's less bad than you might think it is. But I didn't study 6 to 8 hours a day. I had other things to do. So yeah, really varies.
Okay. I think we have time just for a few more questions. I think one that just popped up is how recent are the topics covered? Would a question ask about a topic on a new discovery in the last few months or years?
Yeah, so I think all of us are writing in some capacity this year. And one of the philosophies that we have when writing is that these questions are meant to be solvable. They're not meant to be they're not meant to be so specific to the point that no one's ever heard of them and no one will know how to get to the right answer. And so if there's going to be like cutting edge research or like new discoveries that have been made, we'll be giving enough context in the question so that some of the other biology that you've studied before, like in your background knowledge, will be enough to help you narrow down the choices to come to the right answer. So it'll never be just a knowledge-based question on like what happened, but more so it'll be like about the principles of biology behind how this research is going on.
Yeah,
Okay.
also personally, I'm writing questions this year, and I am not up to date enough on like recent biology discoveries to like write questions on them. So I think you're good on that front. I don't know if Grayson is planning on being evil.
I should read more papers. That's my answer to both. Telling that to both the students and to the people who are writing questions. There's some really great papers that are out recently. Anyway, I do like science professionally now, and you read a lot of papers. So I'm doing it half the time. Really interesting paper about plant genomics just came out, which I've been meaning to read, but I'll get to that. I don't have any comments about this otherwise.
All right, well, I think we are nearing the end of the webinar. I did just want to, I think most of the questions have been answered, whether it's through typed or answered live. So you may look through that, but I did want to ask whether Mrs. Frame had any last words or advice for the students who are watching this and are participating in the open exam.
You must enjoy it, all right? If you don't enjoy it, and be passionate about it, all right? If you get the knowledge from reading a book, like right now I'm reading a book called Weaving Sweetgrass, all right, it's an ecology book, but it's about indigenous people and how all of their raising of plants throughout time had so much to do with their culture. That's just an example, but if you find something else, it's just a learning process, as Kevin was saying, as Derek and Grayson were also saying. It's being passionate and just being open to all that discovery all the time and just enjoy it.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think that is all the time that we have today, and I know if you do have any more questions, I have listed the contacts for all of the speakers here. So if you do have any questions that we didn't get to, or you would like to ask again, please feel free to reach out to them. And thank you so much to all of the speakers. Again, thank you, Kevin, Derek, and Grayson, and thank you, Mrs. Frame, for making this all possible today.